Good morning, everyone. My name is Sibusisiwe Maseko, and I will be your first presenter for today's session in energy resilience on for agricultural producers. This project is in partnership with the Maseko Department of Agriculture, looking to support agriculture producers in becoming more resilient with their energy. I just want to check if anyone on the chat can confirm if you can see my slide. Okay, I will proceed further. So these energy resilience workshops, we have completed our in-person workshops in a number of districts in the Western Cape, and this is the final workshop that is online now. The workshop isn't necessarily supposed to be an event where it's a lot of information dumped. Please feel free in the chat function to ask questions, and we will attend to them at the end of each section. A little bit of background on who we are. We are Green Cape, which is a non-profit organization that was established in 2010 that looks to drive the widespread adoption of economically viable green economy solutions. We work in a number of sectors: water, sustainable agriculture, energy, green finance, circular economy, and some skills development work, with the mandate to increase investment and job creation within the green economy in South Africa in particular, but with ambitions to be across Africa. We work at the interface of businesses, investors, academia, and government, looking to unlock that investment and economic potential of green technologies and services, as well as to support a transition to a resilient green economy. I just want to have a disclaimer at the beginning of this workshop that much of the data that has been generated in this workshop is from our engagements with both this agricultural sector, but then also our energy team. And although we have done as much as possible to ensure that that data is correct, please, whatever you do going forward from here, double check those figures with a third party, whether that is a technology supplier or accreditation board. Please do look beyond us to verify the information that is provided. So I think what we want to start with these workshops is the context of defining what the problem is as it pertains to energy resilience, and then provide an overview of what are the first steps, where to start, how to conduct an energy audit, and then also to look into energy efficiencies on farms. So in terms of the problem, there are three defining points when it comes to energy resilience for South African agricultural producers. The first one is that there's an increasing cost of electricity in energy in general, but more particularly it's exacerbated in the electricity space. The figure on the left of the slide just shows that from 2019, 2020 to 2023, 24, there was market increases in the price of electricity. And the projections of tariffs from Eskom show that those increases are going to, we're going to be seeing price increases that are even more than what has been previously experienced. The second part of the problem is also that load shedding will persist for the midterm. Between 2017 to 2023, we had increasing hours of load shedding, and even by Eskom's own projections, we know that they have predicted that load shedding will persist beyond 2028. In their best case scenario, that improvement, in their best case scenario, they say that that load shedding will improve after 2023 and continue, but at lower levels. In their median case scenario, they project that load shedding will persist at similar levels as previous years, but in their worst case scenario, they project that load shedding will persist, but be even more severe than what has been experienced in previous years. I also want to point out the fact that ESCOM has done these projections every year, and in the previous years, their worst case scenario projections, the reality was that we experienced even worse load shedding than what their worst case scenario is. So as agricultural producers, it's very important to understand that whilst there might be communications that load shedding will end by the end of 2024 or by the end of 2025, projections show that that is probably not the case, and producers need to start making provisions for load shedding to continue, and probably need to experience even worse load shedding than what has been experienced. The third problem is, as it pertains to energy resilience, is that there's been an increasing use of trade policy to influence the adoption of low carbon technologies. An example of this is the European Union, which has adopted the Green Deal, which has targets of low net emissions within the European Union by 2050. And one of the tools that the EU has been using is the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which is a policy that places tariffs on products at the EU border with high carbon emissions. The CBAM, as it's called, is currently focused on cements, fertilizers, hydrogen, electricity, aluminium, iron, and steel. But there is concern that the next phase of CBAM is going to include agricultural products. This is particularly concerning to South African producers because the EU is our second largest market for agricultural products. And a large part of the emissions associated with production in South Africa is due to the fact that majority of agricultural producers use ESCOM power, and the majority of ESCOM's power is coal-based. And so there's producers are caught in the catch-22 where they either need to face the potential of being locked out of one of their largest markets for their products, or they have to make investments in low carbon energy sources. Another side of this problem is the fact that South Africa has a carbon tax act which came into effect in 2019. And the first phase of that did not include the agricultural sector, but the second phase, which will include the agricultural sector, is set to begin in 2026. And that could see agricultural producers having to pay an additional tax for their carbon emissions. And that's another punitive measure that could really undermine the economic viability of the sector if it's unable to shift to more low carbon technologies. So with that in mind, it can be very overwhelming, I think, in the agricultural space because there's a lot of negative sentiment around the future of production. And whilst that can be very overwhelming, and it would be very easy for anyone in the agricultural sector to just say, it's too tough, this space is squeezing me out of it. I think there's also an opportunity to look at how the sector can make a shift to a more sustainable, more low emissions production system. And these workshops are really trying to support farmers and agricultural producers in what are the steps that are available to them to reduce their energy costs, become more resilient as it pertains to load shedding, but then also reduce their carbon emissions. And so in this workshop, we'll be taking you through three main steps, which is the first one is understanding your short and long-term energy context. That includes identifying your energy objectives, how to conduct an energy audit, as well as looking at energy efficiency. The next step is then choosing the right energy option for you, and that includes understanding what technology options are available, and then also determining which technology is best suited for your production type. And then the third step, which will be taken by my colleague, is then looking at making the investment, how to connect with your service provider, how to determine what the best financing option is available, looking at how to collect quotes, and then also getting third-party quote validation. So we have had quite a number of engagements with agricultural producers, all with who have commented different things about where they are and what their objectives are as it pertains to their energy usage on farm. And those concerns really fall into three primary energy objectives, which are cost savings. A producer wants to reduce the amount of money that they are using to pay for their energy. Load shedding resilience. The producer is trying to ensure that the load shedding doesn't impact on their productivity. And then carbon footprint reduction, which is looking at how can I reduce my carbon footprint or the carbon emissions associated with production. Now, within those three objectives, there are very important considerations to make in order to decide which one you would fall into, which is your time of need. When do you need this energy the most? Is it morning, day, or night? The seasonality. What are your seasonal needs and consumption during those times? Is your consumption higher during winter because of heating costs? Is it higher during harvest time versus planting time, etc., etc.? And then the third important consideration is looking at energy drivers versus energy users. And that is what activities drive your energy usage versus which equipment is used to drive those activities. So for instance, if we were to look at a horticultural farmer, an example of an energy driver for them would be irrigation, but the energy user is in fact the pump that they are using. And being able to discern between what your energy drivers are versus your energy users will really open up the solution space for what sort of interventions you can make on farm that will be applicable to your production type. The first most important step in any sort of journey towards energy resilience is conducting an energy audit on your facility. In the figure on the left of this slide, you can see that at the base of the pyramid, conducting an energy audit is placed there because it really is the foundation of any sort of steps that you make towards greater energy resilience. And so it's important that a producer really takes the step seriously and invests quite a bit of energy and intention in ensuring that it's done well. If a farmer wants to conduct a self-audit, it's very easy. It includes just walking around your farm, noting what the energy flows are for each building and each piece of equipment. And when you talk about energy flows, it's about noting where the energy enters into a piece of equipment or a building, and then also noting where it exits. And so in the figure on the top right of this slide, where we have an energy audit around a building, we can note that the energy flows in could be solar energy inflows, oil or natural gas inflows, and then the outflows are can be your process, exhaust, window heat loss, wall heat loss. And that then really assists you in noting where your energy is coming in, but then also where it's leaving usefully versus where it is leaving due to an inefficiency within your system. If a farmer would like to conduct a self-audit, the most basic step, again, I said, is to walk around your farm, noting where the energy flows are for each building and piece of equipment. The table on the right there shows one of the most common high energy consuming activities on farms for each of the different commodities or enterprises rather. And so if a farmer is looking to conduct a self-audit, they should go around looking particularly at those the activities that happen at each of those stations, noting the energy flows in and out of that station. Once you've conducted an energy audit, it becomes quite easy to start looking at where are the places that you could reduce your energy costs. As you can see on the left of the slide, your energy costs are a function of your rand, which is your rand is a function of your Eskom tariffs and your time of use. It's also a function of your kilowatts, and that is influenced by the design of your system and its management. In this example, we're looking at irrigation, but that can be any sort of energy driver on your farm. And then energy costs are also a function of your hours, which are influenced by your scheduling of the use of that piece of equipment. And so when you're able to understand each of those components of your energy costs and how you can manipulate each of those, then you could see ways in which you can reduce your energy costs significantly in the short term versus having to make an investment and only seeing the returns of it in the long term. So 3 quick actions a producer can make to reduce their energy costs is looking at considering load shifting. And that is how can you lift your loads, shift your loads to operate during off-peak or standard periods where your energy costs are relatively cheaper. In the figure below, that shows, I'm sure people are quite familiar with this wheel, which shows the peak, standard, and off-peak times for Eskom's tariff costs. And so if you're able to start shifting the usage of high energy consuming users during your off-peak versus your peak times, you can immediately start realizing energy with a reduction in your energy costs. So for instance, we spoke to a farmer, a dairy farmer, who was pumping their shifted their pumping from peak hours to off-peak hours, and that really had a significant reduction in their energy costs in the immediate term. It's also important to look at how to store energy. So sometimes when you are using energy, the time of use is really, you can't shift it to another time, but you can consider using energy at a different time and then storing it in a different capacity. So for instance, if you need to irrigate at a specific time of the day, you can look at how can I pump into an elevated dam and then use gravity irrigation in order to ensure that I'm irrigating at the time that I need, but I'm using my energy at a different time. We also had another dairy farmer who looked into using an ice bath. And so what they were doing was using energy during off-peak times to store energy as a coolant, but then were able to cool their milk, which is coming in during peak times, without having to dispense of any energy. So it's another opportunity is looking at how you can store energy in different capacities without necessarily using energy or dispersing energy at the time that you need it. And then the third consideration to make is how to implement more energy efficient technologies and practices, and that is really looking at how you can improve your system designs and its management. These are just some very common energy efficiency interventions and what we can make on farms. These are very low-hanging fruits, and often their paybacks are less than 3 years. Excuse me. An example of some very common energy efficiencies as it pertains to lighting, specifically bulbs, is looking at how you can replace your CFL bulbs with LED alternatives. Another intervention is possibly looking at installing larger windows to supplement your lighting, instead of just relying solely on artificial lighting. And the intervention as it pertains to refrigeration is just looking at how you can install insulation to reduce your heat losses, doing a lot of maintenance, making sure that you're operating any sort of equipment according to its specifications and not outside of that. These are very small, and often it can seem insignificant interventions that you can make on farm, but often those small interventions stack up to make a very big impact overall. And so it's important to make all of those considerations and to invest in these interventions before considering the larger interventions that one can make. And again, there's a number of energy interventions as it pertains to HVAC, equipment and machinery, irrigation and buildings. And so I don't want to go through all of that because that's a lot of information, but I would direct you to the document that we produced called Greening Your Farm, Energy Focus. And this document is aimed at empowering farmers to understand the basics of energy resilience. It also includes resources, and I'd like to highlight two in particular, which is I'd said previously that a farmer who's looking to do a self-audit can do it themselves, but there also are free resources available through the National Cleaner Production Center, which do a free energy assessment for you, as well as through Eskom's Energy Advisory Service, which also provides free level 1 energy audits. And for both of those, that will a professional is able to do both an energy audit as well as compile a list of recommendations of what sort of energy efficiency interventions can be made by a farmer. This document, the Greening Your Farm with an Energy Focus document, is freely downloadable at our website at the Green Agri website at this link that's down below. So there's been a lot of theoretical conversation around what can be done in terms of energy efficiency on farm, but I wanted to highlight real examples of what, when implementing energy efficiency, what sort of outcomes a producer could possibly experience. The first case study is a business called Daybreak Farms. It's a poultry abattoir located in Gauteng, and with the NCPCSA, they implemented a number of interventions. The two primary ones being LED retrofitting and then increased energy management system awareness amongst staff. And so in the first intervention they made with lighting, they replaced their office lights with LED, but then they also increased the ENMS awareness amongst staff. That investment only cost them about over 4,000 Rand, but they experienced utility savings of 18,400 kilowatt hours. The second intervention they made was specifically for refrigeration and production, and there they increased their ENMS awareness among staff, particularly in reducing machine idling, reducing heat loads in cold rooms. That just means that they reduced the amount of unnecessary lighting or door opening within their refrigeration unit. That investment cost them nothing, but they were able to experience utility savings of over 230,000 kilowatt hours. So all in all, these interventions had provided them savings with over 300,000 Rand per year. So these interventions had a payback period of 0.01 years. So that's basically 4 days. And so it's very important to understand that although energy efficiency can feel very small and not necessarily when you're experiencing load shedding and your energy on your farm can feel like it requires a really big intervention in order to manage it. I think this case study is a really good example of very small interventions can have really big impact. I don't discount the fact that just you paying 4,000 Rand would lead to very significant savings. Another case study is the Plain River Cheese, a business which is located in Stanford, the Western Cape. Again, they worked with the NCPC-SA. This intervention was a bit more expensive. They decommissioned their old steam boiler and looked at purchasing a used hot water boiler. They also installed hot water piping and had both the tank and the piping insulated. That investment cost them 100,000 Rand, but they had utility savings of 1,745 kilowatt hours. That then resulted in total savings of total Rand savings of just over 290,000 Rand per year, with a payback of 0.37 years. So again, this investment was a bit more significantly more than the previous example, but as you can see, the payback was less than a year, just over a third of a year. And so I think just to round off our energy efficiency examples, these are some of the very easy ones that you can make, whether that is investing in metering and monitoring, variable speed drives, heat recovery, lighting. All of these are very small and easy wins, often with payback periods of less than 3 years, but they are a really important first step to make in any sort of journey towards energy efficiency, or energy resilience rather. But then it's also important to note that even if you decide to go further on the journey of energy resilience and towards installing alternative energy systems, you need to implement energy efficiency, because having a more efficient production means that you will be using less energy, which will then mean that you will require a much smaller system, alternative energy generation system, in comparison to what you would have needed before energy efficiency. And that then means that you would spend less capital on that new generation system than what you would have had you not employed energy efficiency. So energy efficiency, it doesn't just have implications in the medium term, it also has a rippling effect and as the further along the journey of energy resilience you walk. So that rounds up the first portion of our workshop. I don't know if we have any questions.
Just when it was shared. Just when the presentation was shared.
Yes, so the presentation will be shared we'll email it to the emails you provided upon registering for this workshop. So if there's no other questions, I'll move along. The second portion is around alternative energy options. So that is now looking at what one should consider for the alternative energy options, looking at what are the generation as well as the storage options that are available, and then looking at what variables one should consider when they're looking at the different options. So just I just want to highlight 3 most common generation technologies that are we've been seeing on farms. The first one is solar PV. I think everyone, or at least the majority of us, know very well the use of solar PV. It is just a technology which converts sunlight into electricity, but it is very dependent on the availability of sunlight to function. Similarly, with small-scale wind, It relies on the occurrence of wind currents to rotate a turbine that then can be used for electricity generation. But this also has limited usages, particularly in places which experience a lot of wind. The third generation technology I wanted to highlight is anaerobic digestion, and that is the use of or the digestion of organic matter under anaerobic conditions to produce biogas that can then be used for either heating, can be used for generating electricity, but then also can be used as a fuel. And we've seen, especially internationally, the use of biogas by producers to drive their tractors and other machinery. Alternatively, when we look at what sort of backup technologies are available, the three most common technologies are your battery storage. That is just a very big Duracell pack cell. And this is not necessarily a technology that can generate energy. It has to be used in conjunction with other energy generating sources like your solar PV or your wind turbine, or even you can connect it to power grid sources, and then that technology is able to dispense energy as when needed at a facility. A second backup technology is your small scale hydro storage. This is the use of running water or water storage in an elevated dam to rotate turbines that can produce electricity. Again, this has very limited applications in South Africa because it requires access to a water source with sufficiently fast running water and also volumes, sufficiently large volumes of running water. But we do see some examples, I think 2 or 3 in South Africa. And then the third backup technology is one of the most popular. It's the diesel generator, and that is the use of a diesel engine to produce electricity. The diesel generators are your most commonly used power sources, particularly because of the fact that it's the most reliable and most accessible technology type within South Africa. So if a producer is looking to invest in these particular technologies, one of the most important variables to consider is which technology is going to match your energy objectives. So as I said previously, your energy objectives often can be distilled into 3 primary objectives: cost savings, load shedding resilience, carbon footprint reduction. But not all of the technologies are able to provide you with, will meet what your energy objectives are. So for instance, if we're looking at cost savings, your solar PV and your biogas are really the only technologies which would be able to serve you if you're looking to reduce your energy costs on the farm. Alternatively then, if you're looking to be resilient from load shedding, solar PV and your small-scale wind are in fact technologies that you wouldn't be able to apply by themselves in order to be resilient during load shedding, because those technologies require some sort of power input in order to continue to run. Again, when we're looking at your carbon footprint reduction, all of these technologies are applicable except for your battery, your diesel generator, as well as your combination of solar and diesel generator. And so what is very important when you're considering which technology to invest in is to match that technology to what your energy objective is, in order for you not to make the investment and then realize that what you've invested in doesn't actually provide you with the solution you were looking for. Another really important variable to consider is really understanding what your load profile is. And that is looking at when are you using energy throughout the day, throughout the year, and whether or not your technology is able to meet your energy usage. So an example that we have here is looking at 3 different energy load profiles and juxtaposing them against when, for example, solar PV generation, typical curves for your solar PV generation of energy. The first profile on your top left is a production type where you're using the majority of your energy during your morning and night. And as you can see, there's a mismatch because where you're using the majority of your energy is when solar PV is unable to generate energy, and vice versa when the solar is able to generate the most energy, your usage is far below what we could possibly use. That doesn't necessarily mean a mismatch in your load profile and your generation profiles doesn't necessarily mean that a technology option is, you should not consider that technology option. It's more around the fact that you're going to have to make additional considerations of how to, what sort of system, whether it's oversizing your system, whether it's having a hybrid system, those are then the additional considerations that you need to make. And again, when we're looking at the other profiles, when you have a very good match with your energy profile versus the generation profile, those just means that your systems will often be much cheaper because it will be sized at the minimum viable size, because your energy consumption is exactly matched by your energy generation. Another really important variable to consider is what the financial implications are for making the investments in an alternative energy. The first one, of course, I think is always the first one that is considered is the capital outlay of having to invest in that particular system. But then it's also important to consider what are the operations and maintenance costs of having to continue using that system. So, for instance, solar PV capital expenditure is much higher than, say, diesel generation. But the operations and maintenance of diesel is higher than you would have for solar generation, because once you have installed your solar PV system, there's very minimal maintenance that needs to be done. Whereas for a diesel generator, its operations and maintenance includes the purchasing of diesel fuel throughout its lifespan. And so these different considerations can really then be distilled into a metric called the levelized cost of energy. This is a metric that is calculated looking at what the total life cycle cost of a particular technology is divided by its total lifetime energy production. So example of this will be looking at it's the sum of your capital outlay, your operational costs, and your maintenance costs. If you purchase that equipment using a loan, then you'll also include your interest costs for that technology divided by the total lifetime energy production. And that comes out as a rand per kilowatt hour value. That is really useful metric to figure out whether or not a project is worth moving ahead with, because you can either use that rand per kilowatt hour value to compare it to your current ESCOM tariffs, and if it comes out lower than what your current ESCOM unit tariff is, that is an indication that that technology, you'll see some reduction in your energy costs if you make an investment in that technology. But then also that tariff is really a useful metric in comparing the price of energy between different technologies, particularly those which have different lifespans, which have different capital costs, which have different sizes, etc. So this table is a table that we can use to give an estimate of what the capital outlay for different technologies are. So as you can see, for different systems with different kilowatt outputs, kilowatt peak outputs, you will have different ranges of what you can expect to pay for that system, starting from systems that are less than 500 kilowatt peak, going to those which are between 500 to 1,000 kilowatt peak, and then those which are more than 1,000 kilowatt peak. And it's just a general thing to highlight is the fact that as you get larger systems with larger power outputs, you'll often then see a reduction in the amount of money per kilowatt, rands per kilowatt peak that you have to pay, just due to economies of scale. And then again, so with generation technologies, you're able to measure them in kilowatt peaks, but then with energy storage, we often are measuring it in kilowatt hours. And so then just looking at the capital outlay for your energy storage, particularly your lithium ion for systems which are less than 500 kilowatt peak, all the way to more than 1,000 kilowatt peak, you have ranges that go from 500,000 to 700,000 grams per kilowatt hour capacity, versus your 4,000 to 600,000 kilowatt hour rands per kilowatt hour capacity. So this table can be a bit difficult to read. So I just included the calculations of how you'd be able to calculate your capital outlay below the table. So once you have decided what your system size is, whether that is your kilowatt peak or your kilowatt hour, you can times it by the price per kilowatt peak or hour that you find in the table, and that will give you an indication of what your capital outlay is. So for instance, if I'm looking to invest in 100,000 kilowatt peak solar PV system, I will times that 100 kilowatt peak by the range that falls in under the less than 500 kilowatt peak column, which is 12,000 to 15,000 rands per kilowatt peak, and that is equal to an estimated capital outlay for that system of 1.2 to 1.5 million. Again, if we're just going to look at the LCOEs, it's important to acknowledge, to compare what sort of price you're looking at for your different technologies for different energy objectives. So for instance, if we are looking at solar PV and biogas, which are the only technologies that would be applicable for your cost savings, we see that the LCOE for solar PV is between 0.60 to 0.75 rands per kilowatt hour, versus biogas, which is 1 rand 22 to 3 rand 18 rand per kilowatt hour. I also wanted to highlight the fact that if you're making a consideration to invest in biogas, you also have to ensure that you, or at least investigate whether you have sufficient access to the minimal viable amount of waste you need in order to generate a sufficient amount of energy for your farm. So the table right at the bottom of the slide is just to look at how much kilowatt hours per ton waste each of the different feedstocks are able to produce, and then for say a biogas system which has a capacity of 220 megawatt hours. If you are looking to invest in that type of system, you would need to ensure that you have access to on-farm, or you're generating. For instance, if you're a vegetable farmer, you'd require vegetable waste, which is between 1,467 to 2,200 tons per month of vegetable waste. And as you can imagine, not, that means that although you, as a producer, you might want to consider biogas, and it fits within what your objectives are, you also then need to consider the cost of having to store that amount of waste, but then also even have access to that amount of waste. So these are also very important considerations to make before making your investment. When we're just looking at load shedding resilience, you can see that the different technologies which are available, or technology options that are available, your battery, your diesel generation, your biogas, and your solar PV plus batteries. These technologies have quite a high LCOE, often much higher than what your ESCOM tariffs are. But that shouldn't be something that is prohibitive, I think, particularly because especially when we are considering the fact, or when we start considering the fact that load shedding has a significant impact on production, it's important to consider the fact that your ESCOM tariff, or comparing your LCOE for the technologies to your ESCOM tariff, doesn't take into account the cost of your loss of production by still being solely reliant on ESCOM power. And so that's also a very important consideration to make, is that although those LCOEs are much more expensive, if you were to calculate what your loss of production is on farm by having to use a number of 2 to 4 hours multiple times a day, what implication that has on your revenue, you might actually see that the LCOE comes in much lower when it takes into account the cost of lost production. And so all of these considerations can really be summarized along this table. This table just shows what it's just a comparison between the different technologies across the different considerations, both economic and technical. With green just showing that technology is better than the majority of the technologies in comparison. The yellow meaning that technology is mid-range in comparison to the other technologies, and then the red showing that the technology is worse than the majority of the technologies. So we went through the economic considerations that one must make, your capex, your maintenance costs, and your LCOE, but there are also technical considerations that one must make when looking at the different technologies to invest in. That is your land availability, there's sufficient space available to invest in that technology. Your EIA, which is your environmental impact assessment, whether or not you would need to conduct an EIA and have sign off in order to invest in that technology. This is particularly important because that process can take quite a bit of time. And so if you are looking to invest in a technology that you can have up and running in a few months, the need for an EIA can delay your timelines quite significantly. The third important technical consideration is also access to service providers. Whilst all of these technologies are viable technologies in different contexts, it's important to consider that some technologies have greater access to, has a greater pool of service providers available than others. And that's important because if you are looking to, during the phase of collecting quotes, the more quotes you're able to get, the better cost you'd be able to get from the system, because service providers aren't able to charge a premium for being one of the few service providers that can provide you with that technology. But then also it's an important consideration because if your system runs into any trouble and requires maintenance or fixing, your greater access or larger pool of service providers ensures that you're able to get a service provider which may be closer to you, and it isn't a problem that if you're based in Camp William, the only person who can assist you is in Joburg, and then you have to wait for them to fly down to Cape Town and drive to Camp William and back, and the costs associated with that. So all of these considerations are things that you need to consider in order to ensure that when you're making the investment in an alternative energy generation or backup technology, you are anticipating what possible problems and the solutions that are available to you to solve those problems. So I just want to then end this portion of the workshop, just highlighting the fact that again, all of these technologies are viable technologies, and some are stronger in certain contexts than others. But going forward, we will be focusing on the three technologies which have the most applications across South Africa, which is your solar PV, your battery storage, and your diesel generation. This in no way is trying to impress the fact that you should not consider other technologies. If you are interested in investing in other technologies, please do go ahead with that and exploring that and investigating those. But for us, in order to provide as comprehensive information as possible to the largest number of people, we choose to focus on these technologies, to really hone in on these technologies due to the fact that they are the most applicable technologies across South Africa. So I'm going to pause there. I don't think we have any questions from the audience. I think having had this spoken for an hour, 15-minute break is body break. I would recommend us doing a 15-minute body break. So we will return where my colleague Christoph will be talking about making the investment as a next step on your energy resilience journey. Please feel free to go get a coffee, go stretch, and we'll be back at 4:00.